Study 1. All right, buckle up, buttercups, because scientists have been peeking into the groovy world of psychedelics and found some pretty wild connections to how we see ourselves and who we want to snuggle with. So these brainy folks published a study in the Journal of Sex Research. Fancy, right? And it turns out that when people dabble in things like magic mushrooms or LSD, it can jiggle their ideas about their sexuality, how they express their inner dude or dudette, or neither, and even how they do the whole relationship dance. They asked a bunch of people, 581 to be exact, who'd taken psychedelics about their experiences. And guess what? A whole lot of them, like a holy moly, that's a lot majority, said they noticed changes in their love lives and how they felt about their own gender, both while they were tripping and even after the psychedelic party was over. Think things like suddenly finding their partner even more attractive, feeling way more open to new things, and even having their sense of man or woman get a little wiggly. Now, why did these scientists get their lab coats in a twist about this? Well, everyone's been buzzing about how psychedelics might help with mental boo-boos like depression and PTSD. But these researchers were like, hold up, what about how these mind-bending substances mess with our social lives and relationships? Past ideas hinted that psychedelics could make us feel closer to people and chill out our rigid ideas about ourselves. This could open up new ways of feeling all gooey about someone, who we're drawn to, and even who we think we are inside. Even though folks have been whispering about this stuff for ages, think hippies and free love, actual scientific proof was kinda thin on the ground. One of the main brainiacs behind the study, a Professor Daniel J. Kruger, pointed out that psychedelic use is super popular right now, and there's a ton of research happening, mostly focused on fixing mental health stuff. Which is great and all, he says, though we think there is so much more to explore. He even brought up the legendary Timothy Leary, who apparently thought psychedelics were awesome for the horizontal tango. Professor Kruger wondered if this was actually a common thing and if these substances could lead to deeper connections with others. He also asked some pretty deep questions like, could this help folks in relationships long-term, or even people who feel all sorts of uncomfortable with their gender? Turns out nobody had really looked into this scientifically before. So, to fill this brainy gap, the team sent out a secret online survey to grown-ups who'd played with psychedelics. They found these folks through email lists, social media, and even a real-life psychedelic fan club meeting. The survey asked all sorts of nosy questions about who they were attracted to, their relationship history, how they expressed their gender, and if they noticed any changes while or after their psychedelic adventures. They also wanted to know what kind of psychedelics they used, how much they took, and a little bit about who they were. The survey folks were a mixed bag, from fresh-faced 18-year-olds to wise 85-year-olds. Most had munched on magic mushrooms, sipped some LSD, or popped an MDMA. And most of them went for the full-on roller coaster ride rather than just a tiny little microdose. About half were ladies, and a smaller bunch identified as neither strictly male nor female. Here's where it gets interesting. Around 70% of these psychedelic explorers said their sexuality or sexual experiences had been affected. These changes were a bit more common while they were actually tripping, but some folks said the changes stuck around even after the psychedelic dust settled. And mostly these changes were seen as a good thing. People were more likely to say they were even more smitten with their partners, their relationships felt better, and their sexy times were, well, sexier. But hold your horses. Professor Kruger was quick to point out that there wasn't one single aha moment that everyone experienced. It depends on the person, their experiences, and their context, he said. For example, some folks said they suddenly had amazing communication with their partners, while others realized their relationship was toxic and hit the eject button, sometimes after being together for donkey's years. Talk about a mind opener. When it came to gender identity, about 1 in 10 people said psychedelics made them think differently about who they were inside or how they showed it on the outside. Some described feeling more like their true selves, more accepting of who they were and more open to different ways of being. Some even felt like the whole man and woman thing was a bit too restrictive and felt more fluid or just ditched the labels altogether. Others just felt a bit more free to wear what they wanted or explore different sides of themselves. Groovy and, get this, some people's attractions shifted too. About a quarter of the women and 1/8 of the men said they felt more attracted to the same sex after their psychedelic journeys. And folks who identified as gender diverse were even more likely to experience these changes in attraction. This suggests that psychedelics might make some people feel more open to different kinds of love. Professor Kruger found this pretty mind-blowing. He even mentioned that back in the day, some people tried to use psychedelics to cure homosexuality, which, by the way, used to be considered a mental illness. Yikes. Thankfully, we now know that's totally not cool. Professor Kruger's study suggests that psychedelics might actually help people embrace who they truly are. High five for authenticity. The study also found some interesting shifts in how people did relationships. After their psychedelic escapades, more people said they were in serious relationships, exploring polyamory, loving more than one person, or dating multiple people. Fewer people described themselves as single compared to before they took the plunge. This suggests that psychedelics might play a role in how we form and think about our romantic connections. Turns out, a few things made it more likely for people to experience these changes. Younger folks were more likely to see shifts in gender expression and sexual experiences. People with lower incomes were slightly more likely to see changes in their relationship styles and who they were attracted to. And those who took bigger doses of psychedelics were more likely to experience both short-term and long-term effects. Also, unsurprisingly, people who identified as gender diverse were way more likely to report changes in their gender identity and how they expressed it. Now, before you go trading in your sensible shoes for tie-dye, the researchers pointed out some important limitations. This study was like taking a snapshot in time, so they can't say for sure that psychedelics caused these changes. It's possible that people who had positive experiences were just more likely to fill out the survey. Also, the folks in the study were already interested in psychedelics, so they might not represent everyone. The researchers also warned that what people expect to happen when they take psychedelics can actually influence their experience. So if you go in thinking you'll suddenly be attracted to your mail carrier, well, who knows? The study also didn't look at things like whether people were using other substances, what specific psychedelics they used, or if they talked about their experiences with their partners, all of which could play a role. But hey, Professor Kruger is excited. He said this was just the first step in exploring this trippy territory. Now that they've found some interesting stuff, they're planning more research to dig deeper. He reminded us that most of the people in their study weren't in therapy. They were just exploring psychedelics on their own or with friends, and some of these changes were totally unexpected bonuses. He did give a little PSA, though. While many people reported good stuff, some had challenging experiences. Even seasoned psychedelic veterans can have rough trips. So, if you're thinking of diving into this world, it's super important to be prepared. Have a good mindset and be in a safe and supportive place. Take it seriously, he warned. It's not like getting drunk at a party. Apparently, setting intentions for your psychedelic journey can also lead to better outcomes. So, this study is just the beginning of understanding how these mind-bending substances might shake up our ideas about love, gender, and who we are. The research team has even launched a brand new survey for 2025 to gather even more juicy data. Their big dream is to get a full picture of how psychedelics affect our social lives outside of the doctor's office. Professor Kruger is practically buzzing with excitement about their new survey and encourages anyone 18 and older who's dabbled in psychedelics to participate. He promises it's totally anonymous and they won't be collecting any creepy personal info. So if you've got a psychedelic story to tell, they'd love to hear it. It sounds like the journey into the psychedelic self is just beginning. Study 2. All right, Gather round, folks, because scientists have been doing some serious snooping in our DNA, and it turns out some parts of it are evolving faster than a toddler hyped up on candy. Now, knowing how our DNA changes over time is super important. It helps us figure out the risks of inheriting funky genetic diseases and understand how we went from being single-celled blobs, probably, to the magnificent, pizza-loving beings we are today. But here's the kicker. Some of the most interesting and changeable bits of our DNA have been like that locked cabinet in your house, totally off-limits to curious researchers. Until now, a crack team of brainy boffins from various universities and tech companies teamed up and used some seriously fancy DNA-reading gadgets to create the most detailed map ever of how our genes morph through generations. Think of it like finally getting a super high-res map of that weird part of town you always wondered about. And guess what they found? Some parts of our genetic code are changing way faster than anyone thought. This is like discovering that your internet speed is actually warp speed. It opens up a whole new world of possibilities for understanding where diseases come from and how we humans evolved our quirky traits. One of the head honchos, a Dr. Lynn Jord, put it nicely. It's these changes, these mutations, that ultimately make us different from other creatures. He basically said we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of what makes us uniquely us. Their findings were so cool. They even got published in the super smarty pants journal Nature. Here's the lowdown in bullet points, because who has time for long paragraphs? Some of the speediest changing parts of our DNA are also the trickiest for scientists to study. It's like trying to count grains of sand during a sandstorm. These clever researchers used super advanced DNA reading on a family that spanned 4 generations to see how genes changed over time. That's like getting a VIP backstage pass to the genetics show. Turns out some bits of our DNA are mutating faster than a politician's stance on, well, anything. Why should you care? This helps families with genetic diseases make smarter choices about their risks. Knowledge is power, people. The biological speed of light. Sounds fancy, right? By comparing the DNA of parents to their kids, the scientists could see how often new genetic hiccups occurred and got passed down. Dr. Jorda says this rate of change is as crucial to understanding human biology as the speed of light is to physics. This is something you really need to know. The speed at which new variations pop into our species, he explained. Basically, all the little differences we see between people, from eye color to the ability to slurp down milkshakes, thanks to lactose digestion, all started with these tiny DNA changes over time. The researchers reckon that every single one of us has about 200 new genetic changes that weren't in either of our parents. And a lot of these changes happen in those super hard-to-study parts of our DNA. Sneaky little genes. Another smart cookie, Dr. Aaron Quinlan, said that before, scientists could mostly only study the boring, slow-changing parts of our DNA. But with these newfangled DNA reading tools, they could finally peek at the previously untouchable regions, the ones that are changing like crazy. We saw parts of our genome that are bonkers mutable, almost a new change every single generation, he exclaimed. Other parts of our DNA, thankfully, were more chill and stable. Dr. Jord thinks this new information will be a big help for genetic counselors. Imagine a family has a child with a genetic disease. They'll want to know, did we pass this down, or is it a brand new random thing? If it's from a mutation hotspot, it's more likely to be a one-off in the child, meaning future. Kids might have a lower risk, but if it was inherited, then future kids have a higher chance. It's like knowing if that weird rash your kid has is from something they touched at school, or if it's a family heirloom of itchiness. The platinum pedigree sounds like royalty. The big breakthrough for the researchers was a super cooperative family from Utah who've been working with geneticists since the 1980s. They're part of a fancy group called the Centre d'études de polymorphisme humain consortium. Try saying that 5 times fast. This family was a gold mine for the Human Genome Project. 4 generations of this generous family donated their DNA and said, "Go ahead and poke around." This gave the researchers an incredibly detailed look at how new genetic changes pop up and get passed from parents to kids. Dr. Deborah Necklason, another brain on the team, said, "A big family with this much history and depth is an unbelievably rare and valuable resource. It helps us understand how our genes change over generations in amazing detail. It's like having a genetic time-lapse video, the best of both worlds, like peanut butter and chocolate for scientists. To get a super clear picture of how our genes change over time, the team used a bunch of different DNA reading technologies. Some are great at spotting tiny little changes, while others can scan huge chunks of DNA to find big alterations and look at those normally hidden parts. By using multiple methods on the same DNA, they got the best of both worlds, accuracy on both the small and large scale. It's like having both a magnifying glass and a telescope for your genes. Looking ahead, the researchers want to use these super scanning techniques on more families to see if the rate of genetic change is different for different folks. Dr. Quinlan said, "We saw some really interesting stuff in this one family. Now we need to know if these findings are true for everyone when we're trying to predict disease risks or how we evolve." The good news is that all this genetic information will be made available for free, so other scientists can use it in their own studies. It's like sharing your awesome new recipe so everyone can try it and maybe even make it better. This could lead to even more cool discoveries about human evolution and genetic diseases. So, next time you look in the mirror, remember that your DNA is a constantly evolving story, with some chapters being written much faster than we ever imagined. Study 3. All right, gather round, ye bread-loving, wine-sipping humans. Scientists have been doing some detective work with something you might have in your pantry right now. Good old baker's yeast. And guess what? It seems this tiny fungus has been following our footsteps like a microscopic shadow throughout history. Yep, researchers at the University of Georgia, go Dogs, have been digging into the DNA of yeast, the unsung hero of our pizzas and Pinot Noirs. Turns out this little critter can tell us a surprising amount about how our ancestors bopped around the planet. We've been best buds with baker's yeast for ages, like since 7000 BCE. That's when we figured out it could turn flour into fluffy, bread and grape juice into, well, liquid happiness. But this same species of yeast also lives wild and free on trees, minding its own business. While the domesticated and wild yeasts look different genetically, think city slicker versus country bumpkin, the UGA scientists were curious if they were secretly connected. One of the lead yeast whisperers, Duda Bensason, said that previous studies hinted that forest yeasts were different, and his own work in Europe backed that up. But we wanted to go deeper and see the family tree of these yeast groups in America and Europe, he explained. It's like trying to figure out if your city cousin and your distant rural relative have the same weird uncle. So the team grabbed publicly available yeast data from all over the globe and even swiped some yeast samples from tree bark in various regions, especially the southeastern U.S. Apparently, some were even chilling near the famous arch on UGA's campus. They then played genetic matchmaker, comparing the DNA of yeasts from different places. Another key yeast investigator, Jacqueline Pena, pointed out that they're seeing distinct yeast neighborhoods within continents. And surprisingly, she said, even though we thought the wild yeasts would be totally separate, it seems they've had some sneaky interactions with human activity. It's like finding out that the supposedly wild cat down the street secretly comes to your porch for snacks. Now, scientists are still a bit clueless about how exactly these tiny microbes live in the wild. Because of this, the researchers gently warned that we humans might be unintentionally messing with the environment in big ways without even realizing it. It's like accidentally rearranging the furniture in an ant farm. You might not mean to cause chaos, but you probably will. The Ice Age yeast migration sounds like a blockbuster. To collect their yeast samples, the researchers basically went around peeling off bits of tree bark and putting them in tiny yeast hotels. sealed tubes. Then, using a process kind of like making wine, but without the eventual happy hour, they coaxed the yeast to grow and analyzed its DNA to figure out when different yeast groups branched off from each other. It's like tracing family lineages through old photo albums. We were expecting these to be ancient splits, like the forest yeast had been doing their own thing since forever, said Bensason. But to our surprise, it roughly lined up with the last ice age, which is around the time humans started farming and spreading out across the world. Talk about a Yeasty Boys world tour. Peña described this as a unique duality, a wild side and a domesticated side of yeast, both somehow influenced by us humans. It's like having a pet wolf that secretly enjoys watching reality TV American. Yeast goes on a European vacation, wine edition. While comparing yeasts from different corners of the world, Peña and Bensason stumbled upon something peculiar. The yeast in the winemaking regions of southern Europe looked suspiciously similar to the yeast found in the southern U.S. Their data even suggested that the American yeast hitched a ride to Europe in the last few hundred years. Talk about a transatlantic stowaway. The researchers think this might be thanks to the Great French Wine Blight. Back in the 1850s, some clumsy humans accidentally introduced a nasty bug to Europe that devastated the vineyards. To save their beloved wine industry, they brought over bug-resistant vines from North America. Now these American grapes weren't great for making wine themselves, so the clever Europeans grafted their own grapevines onto the sturdy American roots. And in doing so, the yeast living on those American vines hitched a ride and mingled with the European yeast. It's like a botanical and microbial exchange program. Are we unwitting yeast movers? Probably. Studying yeast in this way gives us a fascinating glimpse into how humans have moved around and interacted with their environment. However, Bensason raised a slightly alarming point about how we might be unknowingly changing the world around us. If humans, without even trying, were moving microbes around thousands of years ago, just think about all the stuff we're doing now, exclaimed Bensason. We might be changing all sorts of things without a clue. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's a little worrying that we have no idea what we're doing. It's like realizing you've been accidentally training squirrels to steal your neighbor's bird seed. You didn't mean to, but here we are. So next time you enjoy a slice of bread or a glass of wine, take a moment to appreciate the tiny yeast. That made it possible. And maybe spare a thought for all the other tiny organisms we might be inadvertently taking on our global adventures. Who knows what stories their DNA might tell?